Senate, Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia and Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. Welcome back to Meet the Press to both of you.
Thank you. Good to be back again.
Great to be with you. Thank you both for being here. It is so great to have you both here for this bipartisan conversation. And we really want to focus on how we can restore bipartisanship in Washington and also those conversations across America that just aren't happening. You are two senators who care deeply about bipartisanship, and it comes at a time when we are very fractured here in Washington as a nation. I wonder if you can take me behind the scenes, and Senator Warnock, you can begin. Do you all have conversations about how you can restore bipartisanship? Are those conversations happening?
Absolutely, and I can tell you that for me, and I'm sure Senator Lankford would agree, bipartisan work is as basic as the American covenant, e pluribus unum, out of many one. And so, you know, we have differences of opinion, but the issue is our humanity and trying to build and strengthen the American family. That's the spirit with which I come to this work. It's informed by my years as a pastor. I still lead my church. And I'm deeply honored to work with Senator Lankford. And this week and in recent days, we've been trying to think about ways we can do more work together.
Senator Lankford, tell me about some of those conversations. How do you start the conversation of how you can do more work together?
So what's interesting is I really don't think of this as bipartisan work. This is just American work. Most people don't think of themselves first as Republican, Democrat, Independent. They think of them first as just human beings and neighbors and people that work and in families. And so really what we're talking about is how do people who disagree sit down and figure it out? That's where we are. Unfortunately, Washington, D.C. is a mirror to the country that the country doesn't really like. Everybody looks at Washington, D.C. and says, those people yell at each other and everything else. And I typically will smile at folks when they say, those crazy people yell at each other. It's like, what was Thanksgiving like when your whole family got together last year? And what happens is family members get together that aren't together all the time. They see their differences and they have arguments. I was like, well, that's D.C. That's what's happening. People that disagree. But the difference is we're not supposed to just come here and just figure out how to be bipartisan. We're supposed to figure out how to solve problems. And two people that disagree or 100 people that disagree or 435 in the House that disagree have got to be able to sit down, be grown-ups, and say, let's talk this out. Let's figure it out.
Do you feel like you're in a minority of people who care about figuring it out right now in Washington? Because certainly across the country, as we're saying, relationships, conversations are fractured.
Yeah, conversations are fractured. I don't think I'm in a minority that want to figure it out. I think I'm in a minority that has hope we will figure it out. I think a lot of people just lost hope this gets better, and I think that's the emotion of the country, is they want it to be fixed, but they can't figure out how it's going to actually happen. The latest poll I saw was over 70% of the people in the country don't like the direction of the country. That's not a political statement. It's an emotional statement, like what's happening to us as Americans. And my basic statement is, well, Americans are all made up of individual Americans. When each person decides they're going to do it different, America decides they're going to do it different.
Let me give you some more polls, because you're absolutely right. Almost 2/3 of people say they feel exhausted when they think about politics. 55% say they feel angry. More than 60% say having political conversations with people they disagree with is stressful and frustrating. Senator Warnock, how did we get here?
Well, you know, as a pastor, I've sat in my study many times with families that are struggling. And I think what's important is to remember that you're family. Right. And I think that what we're dealing with is the fundamental assault on that basic understanding that we are the American family. And all families have a complicated story. You know, we sort of gloss over things, but just beneath the surface at the family reunion, there are stories, there are parts of our family life that, you know, we may not necessarily want to talk about, but it's all there. And the issue is remembering that you're still family. We have differences, but we sit together and we work it out. Now, a lot of these differences are structural. I do agree that Washington, in some ways, in many ways, is a reflection of the country, but there are some structural issues like gerrymandering, partisan racial gerrymandering, that fracture the country, the ways in which people's voices have been squeezed out of their democracy. I think that there are many issues. I'll pick one fraught issue, like gun violence. There's a Fox News poll that said 86% of Americans believe that we ought to have just basic background checks when it comes to gun violence. And yet we can't seem to get legislation that reflects anything near that level of agreement between the left and the right among ordinary citizens. We have to fix that.
Senator Lankford, what do you make of that, an issue like gun violence, where we are seeing over and over again these school shootings that rip schools, rip communities apart? Do you think there will be a time when and there have been moments of bipartisanship on this issue, but few and far between. Do you think there's space for something larger getting done?
So I still go back to the most basic issue. Gun violence issues really break down to family issues. Very often when you have someone that ends up being a violent attacker somewhere, you go back and say, what was the family life? What was happening in their schools? What was happening in that environment? And so we want to say, just pass a law and that fixes it. But there are many issues in America. You don't just pass a law and fix. It's a heart issue. Racism is a heart issue before it's a legislative issue. Now, there are legislative issues where you say we got to make sure everything's fair, balanced, opportunity for everybody. But it's a heart issue at the core of it. I started several years ago just asking people a simple question. Has your family ever invited a family of another race to your home for dinner? And most of the people caught me of all races and said, well, I have friends of other races. I was like, that's not what I asked.
Wow.
In your home, has a family of another race ever been in your home and shared a meal? And most people I talk to of every race of Americans have said, no, that's never happened. I said, well, that's a barrier literally at our front door where our kids aren't growing up seeing families of other races around the kitchen table and just having normal conversations. That's a hard issue and a family issue to be able to work through. Same thing with gun violence and other things, to try to figure out what's happening in our culture and our society that we've got to break down to see this kind of anger and hatred.
Well, another issue that you've both worked on. Go ahead, Senator.
Well, look, it is a hard issue. It's a family issue. But we've got to address the fact that this doesn't happen in other countries where there are their family issues, their heart issues. This is kind of bipartisan conversation that happens between two Christian brothers who have deep love and respect for one another. But I think we would agree that there's more work that can be done.
Sure.
In this area, and we need more honest conversations like this for that to happen.
Well, speaking of more work that needs to be done, I want to talk about another big issue, certainly that you've been very involved in, Senator Lankford, immigration. You were very close to getting a bipartisan immigration deal, and I know you were working hours nonstop to try to get this done. It fell apart in the end. We won't get into all of the reasons why, but you were actually censured by Republicans in Oklahoma, in your home state. What does that say? And what message does it send to people who say there's no hope for the bipartisan deals, bipartisan deals can get done?
Again, we break down the issue on. It's not necessarily bipartisan. It's how do we solve the problem? There's a problem. How do we get together with people we disagree with and figure out how to be able to solve that? That's the ultimate issue. And the focus a lot of times here in Washington, D.C. is how to do bipartisan. When you get home, again, the conversation's not that way. It's how do you actually just solve the problem on it? And we talk a lot about bipartisan disagreements on it, but quite frankly, Democrats have fights with Democrats, Republicans have fights with Republicans. Most of the most heated battles that I face are with other Republicans on it. And then we'll sit down and talk about something and say, where are we going to find common ground on things? But that's just the nature of where our politics are. And I think it still goes back to this core issue. Americans feel like things are broken. And when you begin to lose hope and you feel like things are broken, you get angrier.
Well, speaking of that anger, I mean, Senator Warnock, do you feel like there's a public anger and almost mistrust of people working together, reaching across the aisle to find that common ground?
I think the whole country has what I call a low-grade fever. When some mornings you wake up and you just don't feel really well. You can't even put your finger on it. We've been through 4 years of COVID. And people, the early years of that, the early months of that, having to shelter in, all the trauma around that. 20 years of what felt like an endless war. And then demagogues who who exploit this moment through exacerbating the fault lines, the cultural fault lines of division in our country. And I think people just feel the full weight and the trauma of all of that. And what I would encourage us to do, especially in this season, is to look toward one another rather than to figure out, rather than thinking about how we can hurt one another, how we can pray with one another rather than pray on one another. And, I still have great hope for this country. Our ideals of unity, of inclusion, of equality. And the American story is about pushing us closer towards those ideals. And there have been moments when the democracy has expanded. There have been moments when it's contracted. but any woman will tell you that even contractions are necessary for birth. And so I remain hopeful even in this moment. But it's going to be hard work.
Senator Lankford, talk to members of the Republican Party. What is your message to them this holiday season as we prepare to begin a new chapter here in Washington and as a country together? What do you think Republicans can do better to try to bring about the type of bipartisanship, the work, the spirit that you have been so dedicated to?
I think the key thing is let's identify what the problem is and let's figure out how to be able to solve it. And we find great differences across the country and in different regions. A Republican in Oklahoma is different than a Republican in New York or in Maine or in Washington State. It's just different. They think differently, though we're all in the same party. So even within parties, there are differences of opinion, and there's differences of opinion between Republican and Democrat. We live next door to each other. We figure out how to be able to work it out as neighbors. We've got to be able to figure out how to be able to work it out as well. Now, that doesn't mean we give away our values. We don't have to give away values on it. I'm always looking for where do we have common ground. Compromise is a word that a lot of people throw around on it. I understand what you're trying to say, but I think what people hear, though, especially Republicans, is compromise means give up your values. No, I don't think you should give up your values. I don't think I should give up my values. But there's a lot of areas where we may have 80 or 70% that we do agree on. That's a common ground issue as Americans. Let's do that. And then as Americans think and pray about the next big problem, we'll find that area of common ground again, and let's keep moving. But the worst thing we can do is do nothing. If I can make this simple statement, every single issue that we face, we can either do nothing, something, or everything. Now, problems are so bad. Debt is so big. We're so out of control. Immigration's so out of control. Everybody in my party says, let's do everything. We got to fix it all. And we got to fix it all right now. Well, Washington's terrible at doing everything. We're terrible at it, trying to get everything done on it. But we can't do just nothing. We have to find the something that can get done so we can at least make progress and Americans can feel progress is being made. We're doing something. We're not just sitting there complaining about the problem. We're actually going to try to solve this.
Kristen, I think the problem comes when politicians center themselves rather than the people. If you center the people, you have a shot at getting the policy right.
What is your message to Democrats? What do Democrats need to do better and differently moving forward?
Well, look, you got to listen to the people. We just had an election, and I think we have to take some time to listen to what the folks are saying, what the people are saying, everyday people are saying, and continue to build on our values. Look, I've had success doing bipartisan work, working with people like Ted Cruz, and I did legislation together. I've worked with Republican senators in Alabama to defend and support farmers. A lot more bipartisan work happens very often than you think. Right. Sometimes it's not talked about because that doesn't necessarily fit.
That's not news. Yeah,
it's not. Yeah. I'm trying to be kind.
Newslikes one person doing this and one person doing this.
We do more work maybe than people see.
Let's talk about faith. You both came to politics from Baptist ministries, and I wonder how that background has shaped your work now in Congress. What would people learn if they got to sit in church with you all on Sundays? How does that inform the type of politician you are, Senator Lankford?
Well, I have to tell you, when I accepted Christ, it was a simple thing for me to understand. I didn't make the universe. I'm not God, and I know I have sin in my life, and I'm separated from God. And so when I accepted Christ in my life, it was a revolutionary event in my own soul. That affects how I treat other people. That affects how I treat my wife, my children, people I disagree with, my staff. It affects how I drive. I say to people a lot on the faith issues, if your faith only affects what you do on Sunday mornings, things that you only do on a weekend, that's called a hobby. A faith is something that permeates every part of what you do. And so my faith affects me. I see people as creating the image of God, and they have value and worth. We may disagree on an issue, but that person's creating the image of God. They have value and worth the same as I do on that. And so I'm going to treat them different. I want to have strong debate on issues because clearly I'm right, clearly you're wrong, clearly. So, all those issues, I want to talk about the issues and what I believe in, but I should be able to do it in a respectful way to say, I want to also listen because I'm a person that should learn in humility as well because God has affected me, and I'd love to have that for other people as well.
Senator Warnock, how does your faith impact the work that you do every day here in Washington?
Well, I often say to folks that I'm not a senator who used to be a pastor. I'm a pastor in the Senate. And, I don't know if you've ever been to a Baptist service. You took great risks inviting two Baptist preachers.
This could go wild.
There's a limit to this.
We were worried about the time cues.
15 minutes to clear his throat. So, You know, look, every Sunday at my church, after I finish the sermon, I say the doors of the church are open. It is our invitation to discipleship. And it is an openness, and you really mean it when you say, whosoever will, let them come. I have brought that same spirit to my work in D.C. I literally mean it. Like, whoever I can work with to get good things done for the people of Georgia, I will do that. And my work as a pastor, walking with people, even as you work for the people. Very often in D.C., you can't get things done at the rate that you want to get them done. But I think people need leaders that they feel walking beside them in some sense. I've spent years literally in hospital rooms. I've seen up close what happens when the diabetes, for example, gets out of control. I've been there when families have had to face the terrible news that someone has to get an amputation. And so it was those folks that I had in mind when I wrote my bill to cap the cost of insulin to $35 per month. And so I try to bring that spirit of centering people, the openness to work with anybody to get things done.
Do you worry that politics is impacting people's religious faith, Senator?
Well, I think that we shouldn't turn the politics into a God. Yeah. You know, one central tenet of our faith is that you have no other God before me. And look, I don't want to turn politics into a God. I don't want to practice my faith in such a way that I'm not open to others. You know, I'm a pastor, but I believe firmly in the separation of church and state. It is the values that come from my faith that inform my work every day in D.C. and not the doctrine. And so, you know, it's important that the table is broad enough to embrace people of moral courage.
Do you think, Senator Lankford, that faith can still help bridge the divide in politics?
Yeah. Absolutely, Anna. And us both being Baptists, to a little Baptist history here, Baptists were kicked out of all the colonies. And originally, when we were just colonies, every colony had its own religion. There was a time in America where you had to be a certain denomination to be a leader in that area. Baptists were kicked out of all the colonies. We didn't all end up in Providence, Rhode Island, actually. That's how it became this Providence, Rhode Island, because it was open to all faiths and all backgrounds, on the unique background on it. This basic tenet of politics affecting your faith or faith affecting your politics, I believe the whole Bible. I just do. And I just believe that's truth on it. One of those truths that are in there is you should love your neighbor as yourself. And in politics right now, it seems to be most interesting when you hate your neighbor and when you attack your neighbor and you go online and go on social media and say something snarky about your neighbor. You're like, I get that's politically interesting and to get you likes on social media, but it violates a basic biblical principle of I'm going to love my neighbor as myself. And I've got to decide as a person of faith, am I going to try to be the most aggressive, angry politician, or am I going to try to be a Jesus follower who also serves in this role?
And that takes me to my next question for both of you. A lot of people are about to be with family for the holidays to celebrate a range of different holidays. And there are a lot of divisions right now in our politics and within people's families, within their friendships. Right. So talk to people. Senator Lankford, why don't you start us off all around the country this holiday season? What would your message be about how they can restart some of those conversations that they may have lost? Well,
it's the most basic thing to have a little bit of humility in relationships and to be able to sit down with people and to be able to get their story, especially with family, to say, hey, we're family. We got to figure this out on it. But for the sake of our children and our cousins and our parents, let's sit down and try to figure out ways to be able to solve this. I've never met a person that regretted solving issues in their own family. I've met a lot of people that regretted broken relationships in their family. So if a relationship is broken in your family, that affects your whole family. So do the hard work, sit down with people you disagree with and say, let's figure this out on it, because it'd be good for us for decades to be able to come on it. And that just a basic gift to your family and to your kids, quite frankly.
Senator Warnock, final thought.
Our faith should not become one more tool in the arsenal of these culture wars. My faith is not a weapon, it's a bridge. And it certainly ought to be able to bridge relationships within one's own family. And so we approach this work with a degree of humility, the recognition that we don't know everything. There are things we can't even see, quite frankly, based on where we're sitting right now in this room. Literally, there are things you're seeing because where you're sitting that I don't see and vice versa. So we have to talk to one another. And in this Christmas season, I have to tell you, my favorite Christmas hymn is O Holy Night. And in there's this one great line. It says, his law is love and his gospel is peace. I would hope that as lawmakers, as citizens, that we will be guided by the law of love, the gospel of peace, regardless of our faith tradition, and that we will see each other's humanity.
Yeah. Senators Warnock and Lankford, such an important and informative conversation. An honor to have you both here. Merry Christmas to both of you.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.